dealt with security for decades at this point, Jeff. Most firms are not reporting as severe of staffing issues as they had at that time. This is going to be a long-term problem. The pipeline of qualified accountants at all levels is far below what it needs to be. Advisory is an overused word in the profession and an underacted upon offering. So many people do consulting and think it's advisory. So many people do CAS and think it's advisory. I've got 125 advisory services in my list. Okay, yeah. And obviously no one firm's going to provide all those. Firms that are using that technology tell me they're getting at least a 5-fold return. It isn't fake, it's real ROI. The Hamas attacks on Israel were reported by the federal government to Israel over a year before they occurred because we had broken encryption. The new quantum computers can and have already broken encryption. And so this is referred to as Y2Q. Y2Q, the day that encryption can be broken. So, there's 20 or 30 products out there, all pretty good. But if you're not using a password manager, you are clearly putting your organization at risk. So healthcare clearly is going to be on the line. 3D printing will get even more sophisticated, but staying in the quantum world. But I still believe in accounting professional relationships with their clients, and I am not a fan of the transactional model. And to me, advisory drives relationships.
Welcome to CPA Transformation Podcast, where innovation meets insight. I'm your host, Jeffrey Cronin, Chief Strategy Officer at Zenwork. Join me as we consider the forces revolutionizing the world of accountants, bookkeepers, and professional tax preparers. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions and invaluable insights brought to you by Tax 1099. To watch and listen to more episodes of the CPA Transformation Podcast, visit cpatransformation.com, or you can visit our YouTube channel at Tax 1099. Hope you enjoyed the podcast. Hello and welcome. I'd be happy to have Randy Johnston here with us. Randy is a nationally recognized educator, consultant, and writer. He's got over 40 years experience in strategic technology planning, systems and network integration, accounting software selection, business development and management, disaster recovery, and contingency planning, as well as process engineering. He's the executive vice president for K2 Enterprises, the nation's leading technology CPA provider to CPA professionals. He delivers seminars to CPAs, business groups, IT leaders on technologies in accounting, healthcare, and banking, with over 30 areas that he covers in various technology topics, including paperless processing, continuity of business operations, accounting software, business strategies across the board. So we're really lucky to have Randy here with us today. Randy, welcome. I'm happy to see you.
Thank you, Jeff. It's a pleasure to speak with you and your listeners today.
Thank you. So let's start off jumping right into the subject that's sort of been a theme of our season. When you look at what's gone on in the accounting industry in general, we spent a lot of time in the community talking about our challenges with qualified staff. How do you think about this? How do you think about this challenge? How should we in the profession look at approaching that?
A fair question. So I'm going to go on a bit of a rant with you and the listeners on this, all right,
Absolutely.
to get us started. And first, I'm just going to say, I think we are past some of the most severe shortages, but the shortages are not going to go away. So if you reflect on where we are now versus 2 years ago, most firms are not reporting as severe of staffing issues as they had at that time. So on the other hand, this is going to be a long-term problem. The pipeline of qualified accountants at all levels is far below what it needs to be. So how do we accommodate that? Well, what most firms have done is first turn to outsourcing. About 25% of all firms in the United States are now outsourcing and offshoring because they just can't find the qualified labor. But an alternative that seems to make sense to me is implementing more automation. And over the long haul, I think this automation will lead to even more use of artificial intelligence. So if you think about outsourcing as one part of the bridge, you think about automation as another part of the bridge, and AI as maybe a closing part of the bridge, I think we're going to get from where we are today to some future state in a few years, let's say 5 to 7 years, where we'll have a lot more augmented capabilities because of our automation and because of the AI, and perhaps we'll continue to use outsourcing, but I think a lot of the outsourcing is going to continue to be more expensive. So Jeff, as I said, kind of a long rant to set that up, but that's the vision of where I see this going right now.
I mean, I guess, speaking as somebody who's worked in software companies for most of their career, there's a lot of parallels to what we saw, going back into the 90s when we first started doing offshore development and looking as an opportunity to get access to, not just get access to talent that was with a huge shortage, but also the cost benefits of, call it labor arbitrage, call it what you want. I mean, what is it you were doing when you were doing that? Is that a fair way to think about how this looks?
It is. And, I'm just reflecting as you're asking the question because productivity gains in the 80s were significant. And I thought it was really interesting that Greenspan in that time as Federal Reserve Chair said, we've had a 25% uplift in productivity and I can't figure out why. And I'm thinking productivity on computers is driving, people's productivity up 25%. These seem pretty parallel. And then about a year later, he came out and said, oh yeah, this computer thing is driving the productivity up. But we have not seen a big uplift in computer productivity since the 80s, which is an interesting problem because it's been relatively flat. We got the big uplift, and then new technologies like Windows and graphical applications and faster computers and all that stuff didn't really make a difference until we hit artificial intelligence. And at that point, we saw another uplift of about 25 to 40%.
Yeah, so that's great. And I mean, I have a note to talk about artificial intelligence later on. I think this is the great time to jump into that subject. You talk about AI. You look at the AI product. As you mentioned, we're finally seeing productivity gains out of a new technology. I mean, I guess I'll put on my skeptic hat for a second and say I thought I heard that was going to happen with blockchain, right? Why is AI different?
And as a matter of fact, that whole skeptic approach is super helpful. One of the areas that I know will make a big difference is quantum computing. And of course, a new quantum facility has been introduced or announced in South Chicago where PSI Quantum is going to build a new quantum plant there. And my belief is over time, quantum will rapidly accelerate artificial intelligence too. But in the past, very recent past, the federal government's actually come out with a measurement for quantum. And I love the quote, we're going to approach every claim about quantum with great skepticism. Okay. It's exactly where you're at on this. Okay. Now, that said, of course, we're pretty adamant about not using artificial intelligence platforms where you're putting client information in them. In other words, protecting PII or any client confidential information is still real critical in this. So not every task can be assisted with AI as it stands today. But our vision is that vendors will introduce AI capabilities inside their products, which you'll just start naturally using the AI and you'll get productivity gains from the software that way. Now, there's, I think, marketing claims, but some real pieces on this with, for example, Thomson Reuters Checkpoint Co-Counsel, or some of the new WK pieces. They've got Wolters Kluwer has about 5 different applications that has some AI in it. And I can see the promise of that. We're seeing a number of products, improving, but I'm going to keep it real simple and keep it personal for me. Because I teach so much continuing professional education, and because I'm still a little old school keeping timesheets. I know many consultants in the profession say you shouldn't keep timesheets, and I think you need them for cost basis, and it gives me a sense of how long it's taking to complete projects. In writing my course materials, even though I'm still personally writing them and not letting AI write them like I see some presenters, generating presentations with AI. That's not me. But the CPE questions that are required, I have generated hundreds of these questions in the last 2 years through AI. This year, I only had to correct 1. Last year, I only had to correct 2. They're writing the questions better than I could write them. The AI is writing the questions better. And what that's done is it's taken a task that typically for me has been 15 minutes a question, maybe 10 minutes a question. Do the math, 10 times 600. That's a lot of hours.
Yeah.
But what I can tell you for sure, Jeff, is I have used almost a full 1/3 less time to write the same quantities of materials. So you take my hourly rate and, cut it in a third, that's a deal.
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at AI, at least in the near term in our profession, you look at it as ways to generate, I guess, to look at the WK or the Thomson Reuters solutions, they're they're really supplementary information to help you navigate materials faster, right? They're not really answering specific customer client questions for you. How do you view the trend, that AI transition over to like transactional activity or even, return preparation? I've seen some claims of return preparation for AI. What do you think about that side of it?
Well, I can tell you, in fact, that works because I've got AI preparation running in my clients. And by name, Black Oar Tax Autopilot is absolutely doing that work. Firms that are using that technology tell me they're getting at least a 5-fold return ROI, and they've sent me their calculations. So it isn't fake, it's real ROI. And normally we want a 2-fold ROI on any technology we're going to adopt anyway, but a 5-fold, that's pretty impressive. Very few errors made in the 1040 side. We see business return capabilities coming with additional vendors. And so this whole AI leverage in tax or in client accounting services or in audit, there are products that are evolving in all those areas. So again, I don't think you'll be using things separately like you might with the bigs, and let's just name the bigs, Copilot 365 or Chat GPT or Google Gemini or Claude. Those are great platforms. I use them all. And I do a lot of things with those. Or let's pick one more, the AI capability inside Adobe Acrobat, where you can summarize PDF documents, which is also very productive. But to me, those are kind of bolt-ons. And yes, we're spending a lot of time doing prompt engineering. In other words, how do we write the questions for these AI platforms? But if you think about it from a technology perspective, most of us don't think anything at all about SSL anymore. Secure socket layer. It's just got
everything has a lock in the corner on your browser.
That's right. We used to have to go through all sorts of gyrations to make that all work. Now it's all built in, and we don't even think about it really. Well, that's how I think AI will be for most of us. It'll just be sitting in the background as an intelligent assistant. And in fact, that's the way I think about most AIs right now. Is they tend to be like an assistant. They start out almost like an intern, not very literate, but the more you use them, the more you train them, the smarter they become. But the vendors that are creating these products are being very thoughtful about where is AI practical. So I think it's beautiful, Jeff, for you to maintain the skepticism. I think that's still the right thing to do. But in the big picture, if you'll start thinking about where you're using a lot of time, and could AI help us get through that today? Productivity, simple productivity lifts, absolutely is there. For example, Copilot 365 with email, summarizing that stuff, beautiful. I just wrote a series of tax processes using Copilot 365, and it generated those in less than 40 minutes. Well, doing one process typically takes me 2 + 2, 2 hours to create, 2 hours to review, 4 hours. I did 75 in 40 minutes, and they're pretty good. You do the math.
Yeah, that's great. So, I mean, obviously there's help from the firms. When a firm starts looking at this, okay, so it's great. We're going to see a 5-fold productivity increase. Well, what am I going to do with my time? How do you see a firm looking at that and saying, hey, what should I do with all that time I just said? Should I just shrink my staff and can have more profit? What do you actually look at when you're talking to folks?
Well, Jeff, we really started with this personnel outsourcing / shortage of talent problem. And, if you can get some percentage uplift, 10, 20, whatever it is, think about it in terms of personnel numbers, maybe your shortage is lightened up a little bit. But the way I think about that is, I think, quite different than many practitioners are, because it turns out so many people have been so compliance focused. They've had so much seasonal compression, so much overwork through the years, that perhaps we can manage our lives back to be a lot more balanced. So that's one way I think about it. The other way I think about it is maybe we can convert ourselves from reactionary practitioners to proactive practitioners, where we can become more advisory. And so advisory is an overused word in the profession and an underacted upon offering. So many people do consulting and think it's advisory. So many people do CAS and think it's advisory. But realistically, advisory practices have to be built on a planning basis, both personal and business, and then services delivered from there. And that is not the way I see advisory done in most U.S. firms.
Yeah. So when you talk about that shift towards, I guess maybe we want to split consulting services from advisory, right? So you have an opportunity to, those consulting services are still an offering that we want to have. How do you view it when you look at a firm, when they've moved, like let's say we've moved return prep to AI, and I've freed up time what kind of advisory or consulting services do you see people wanting to do? Or are you actually advising anybody to particularly focus on any areas with their customers?
Well, I normally, Jeff, ask people to go back and look at their existing staff and what they like to do. So
Sure.
that seems a little simplistic, but then I turn the question to what do my clients need? So let's think compliance for a minute, because many professionals are being told that compliance is going away. I don't buy that logic. I think tax and audit will be around for quite a long time. The same way with client accounting services. I really consider those more compliance services. But if we turn our attention to the mechanics or transactional stuff being gone and the strategic, thoughtful things that accountants can provide, that's where I see it happening. Right now, I maintain a list and it keeps growing. I've got 125 advisory services in my list.
Wow.
Okay. Yeah. And obviously no one firm's going to provide all those, but let's keep it, very straightforward here. Many firms have provided, tax planning services. Now, this is not how much you're going to owe. It's not one of those type of tax estimation. It's really what are some strategies that we can apply to save you significant money. That might be business restructuring and so forth. Another example of an advisory service that not all firms should be in is merger acquisition. You want to sell your business. How do you go about that? And usually if you think about advisory as maybe three levels, primary, secondary, and tertiary, there's certain services that everyone should provide, I believe. Then there's some ones that you might do because it's an interest area for you, and maybe that is tax planning. But there are things that you probably shouldn't do, and I call those tertiary or concierge services, where you refer them to somebody else who has the expertise. So you build a relationship with other professionals and say, look, I'm never going to do business valuation. All right, I'd like to hand my business valuation over to you for work. I'm hoping that you may have some things where I have expertise that you might refer that. But the key here is that as a firm, you're actually trying to maintain the client relationship and the client control. And maybe this is where I'm a little old school, but I still believe in accounting professional relationships with their clients. And I am not a fan of the transactional model. And so many people are thinking transactionally instead of relationships. And to me, advisory drives relationships.
All right. So, when you talk about the, advisory service and all the options you have for things you should and frankly shouldn't do or maybe partner with, how do you maintain a continuity of service with your client in that environment, right? So, are there technologies or platforms you should be using when you have this diverse set of people interacting with the customer that allow you to keep a coherent relationship in place and really keep me from losing track of what's going on?
Yeah, Jeff, interesting question. There are not very many tools to help us in this area right now. And there's a lot of discussion about advisory, but so much of the platforms that I've seen offered are more checklists. They aren't really relational. They're more transactional. Probably the best of these is called the Complete Advisory Solution out of the UK. That was developed by a CPA by the name of John Thompson and some associates. And I think he may have, number one, the most thought leading position on the planet, and he's developed a tool to assist with that. It was really the tool that made me believe that young professionals can provide advisory solutions just as much as old professionals. So, a lot of times I used to say you had to have a lot of gray hair to be able to do this and 10 or 20 years of experience. But it's about asking the right questions, not about solving the problem. So going back to your, comment earlier that consulting is still going to exist, it will. And there are delightful consultants out there. But an advisor is basically identifying the issue and then finding the professional to solve that issue. And that may be in the firm and may not be. But you're looking at the long arc, everything that is needed for a client, and the client's needs change over time. But if the advisor can go in, identify needs, and then start clicking off or servicing each need that they find, that's really how you maintain that long-term and the continuity relationship. And the entire team should see the services that have been offered, that have been completed, and some of the next things that the client wants. Because notice, This is about what the client wants. It's client-centric, not sales-centric or what the firm wants. And, so many of the vendors trying to sell into professions and provide us platforms are trying to get sales for themselves via the CPAs, via the accountants, rather than trying to solve client problems. This has gotten really flipped upside down in the last decade or so, and it's become much more aggravated as the vendors have gotten more desperate for sales numbers and hitting metrics that are unreasonable.
Right. So there's a gap in the space a little bit from the technology side, right? So the complete advisory solution in the UK is looking like the best option out there, but there's an opportunity for somebody to come in, and I'll be frank, ZenWork doesn't offer anything here, so
right. Understood.
Yeah.
And I've watched for this at great length, saying there's got to be more than one. There's got to be something like this. But part of the problem is the professionals who have been doing these services do them in certain ways, and their methodologies are not able to be generalized, is probably the best way to say that. And so the problem here is, how do you take somebody that is new, who has no experience, and get them where they can ask intelligent questions quickly? And you may wind up, so many advisors to the profession claim vertical niches are the way to get there. Go specialize in dentistry, go specialize in farm accounting, go specialize in this, that, or the other. That works because what happens is you get deep vertical industry knowledge. But the issue with that approach is you have to have deep vertical knowledge to really be able to do the services in that area. So onboarding somebody new to the team is actually problematic. Whereas you can truly ask a series of questions that probe what the client wants. And, again, you're not there to solve the problem. You're there to discover the problems. And, the answer is, okay, understand what the issue is. My job now is to go find a way to satisfy this particular problem.
Yeah. So you look at the challenge for really special. I mean, I guess I'll say we've had a couple of people on the podcast who did take that vertical path. But what I'll say is, in the people that I've spoken to, it wasn't intentional. They found themselves with a concentration of customers in a particular vertical. They had naturally built up that expertise in that vertical. That's not, it's not really a repeatable process. As a general, you can't do that intentionally usually, right?
Not usually. And notice sometimes it's accidental. The clients drag you there. Sometimes it's an interest area that you have. Let's say it's healthcare or whatever. So you get there that way. But notice that this verticalization is not really as much what I would consider advisory. It's far more consultative and far more compliance based. So it's an odd juxtaposition here, and it's really a way of thinking about this, because I believe this advisory approach, you can take it to almost any vertical industry, and you can execute it with almost any level of team member. And the more capable your team members, the better you are. But notice we're almost flipping it again to services that are offered. Just because I've got somebody who's great at merger acquisition or business valuation doesn't mean that every client needs that service all the time, or tax planning, if we go back to that example. So you are right. I've met with many beautifully verticalized practices, but they are pretty much in that lane. And as long as that lane operates, let's just say oil and gas, as long as that operates without a downturn, you don't have cycles in your practice. But if you're in a cyclical business, you're going to have cycles up and down in the business as well.
So you bring up this idea that I can train any level's team member to do this properly. How do I do that? Right? Is there material somewhere? Is there an online training course? How do I actually do that?
Yeah, and that's part of the reason I cited the complete advisory solution, because there is training material to do that. And culturally, I think it fits the new generation of professionals beautifully, because a lot of the young professionals don't want to do reconciliations, for 2 years. They want to get at it and work with clients. And attitudinally, a book which changed my thinking about this is called Generations from Gene Twenge. It's a very gorgeous book, and I've recommended it to a lot of people since it was released. But I was IBM management trained, and it actually changed my way of thinking about the training, because in my IBM management training, we were taught that people's attitudes generally are reflected based on what was happening in the world at age 10 for them. And Gene points out that it's not so much what was happening in the world, but the technology of the world at the time. So if you go back to the 30s, the farm automation really drove a lot of people into the cities in that window, as an example. Or we can go back to the smartphone generation transition, which basically occurred in the late 2000, 2006, 7, 8, up to about 12.
Right.
And, if you reflect on it that way, you realize the way we think about the world is driven by a lot of the technologies that were around us when we were age 10.
It's interesting. I've heard conversations around, like the generations defined by, there's a generational event that defines a generation. You get, whether it be the assassination of JFK, the Challenger explosion, right? Those I've not heard the technologies conversation before. I'll definitely have to take a look at that book.
Yeah, I think you'll find it's fascinating because the events is actually the way I was trained to think about this, and it's served me beautifully for decades.
Right.
But it turns out, I think that might have been misguided. And now that we're trying to onboard new generation professionals, there's been a lot of discussion, and I'm not a big, millennial, Gen X, Gen Y. And so that's not the way I think about the world because, I've got some Luddite 20-year-olds and I've got some innovative 60-year-old professionals that I deal with. But it does give you a sense of what's important in general. And that's why I like the book so much, because it's based in strong facts. And there's many things she wrote about that were reported one way in the news and press. And later it comes back correcting to her position. So I've been very pleased with what I learned from her.
That's great. I really appreciate that. I'll definitely, like I said, I'll have to look it up. Actually, we should probably find a way to stick a link to that in the description of the podcast as well. So we'll do that. Yeah. So everybody take a look down below when you watch the podcast, and we'll put a link out there. No referral fees. We don't get any money from that.
No. Nope.
So when you think about, maybe a quick transition over sort of the near term in terms of, as a profession and how technology looks. I mean, we hear a lot about security incidents. We hear a lot about, we're hearing a ton about AI right now. Blockchain disappeared. Which I'm, again, right. That's probably just because it's going to become something in the infrastructure behind the scenes somewhere. It's not really gone. For those of you who are wondering what happened to blockchain, it just got baked into something you're using. You just don't know it's there.
Yep.
So when you look at sort of, the really near term, and I guess maybe let's start with the cybersecurity threats. I mean, just recently, just before we did this recording, we actually had the CrowdStrike outage, which wasn't a cybersecurity incident, although it sure as heck looked like one to everybody to begin with. How do you think firms should think about as we become more dependent, right? So we've now taken AI, we've got our productivity gain by using AI to perform a bunch of these tasks. Have we just developed a bunch of exposure to ourselves and our business to outside threats?
Well, I have dealt with security for decades at this point, Jeff. And so, in fact, I was smiling as you were talking about CrowdStrike because the initial estimates are $4.5 trillion of loss. And I think those are low based on what I know's gone on. Not to mention, I was out and traveling with so many people who couldn't travel in that window. So got to experience it kind of firsthand from an airline perspective. But let's think about security from a firm level, because the CrowdStrike outage affected a lot of the cloud services. But just as important, Microsoft Azure had an outage the day before as well. So on the Thursday before the outage on the 19th, in other words, July 18th, Microsoft had a big outage in the Chicago Azure data center, and a whole bunch of servers went offline. And so we're going to have outages on these providers that are sometimes in their control and sometimes beyond their control. So for cybersecurity, the AI attack vectors have made the attacks far more sophisticated. Our defenses have also become more sophisticated, but generally the bad actors are going to stay ahead of the good actors because they're going to be cooking up new ways to attack. So from a firm perspective, the best way for you to consider this is think about it like an onion where you've got layers of protection. Now, in the 80s, we started off with antivirus because the first viruses began appearing then. And today, things like firewalls in your offices and homes. A lot of professionals don't put firewalls in their homes, but a lot of firewall protection. That's kind of an outer layer, more of the castle and moat type of approach. But you also have to have protection on the inside. So in the technical world, EDR and MDR is how those are, referred to. But the detection response systems that you have running look for bad things that are happening to you. The MDR, the managed part of it, is there's big data center teams that are actually watching all this. So, if you start layering together multi-factor authentication, the antivirus protection, the EDR, the MDR, the firewalls, staff education with tools like KnowBe4 and so forth. You're going to have multiple layers to protect this. Now, today, many of these attacks are still coming at us through email and through PDFs. So we still have that concern, but we're also seeing new generation of attacks. For example, I no longer recommend that verbal confirmations occur on wire transfers because with just 7 seconds of your voice can be perfectly duplicated to say whatever it is what needs to be said. And many of us have left a voicemail message. Hey, this is Randy. I'm sorry I can't come to the phone right now. Leave a message and I'll call you back. Oh, that's enough. They can perfectly mime my voice now, and they can say, yes, this is Jeff, and I am CFO, and yes, I originated a wire for the amount of, and and my security code is XYZ. That those days are well past. So you've got to begin recognizing that voice and video are really at risk. And we're looking even further, Jeff, at future threats. And I'm not an alarmist on this, but I am a realist. We know that the new quantum computers can and have already broken encryption. And so this is referred to as Y2Q, kind of hearkening back to Y2K, but Y2Q, the day that encryption can be broken. And we already know that the federal government has quantum computing that is breaking encryption today. Now, I won't go much further into detail, but I will just call out that the Hamas attacks on Israel were reported by the federal government to Israel over a year before they occurred because we had broken encryption. And if you ask me how I know that, I'll have to kill you. So don't do that. In any case, but encryption.
There's a Bletchley Park somewhere that's been running these things.
That's kind of the way it works. So, but the net here is encryption will get broken, and there's quantum hacking as a service that will be available. And right now, bad actors are gathering large data stores to decrypt. Well, consider what would happen if all the encryption in our banking systems was taken out of service, much like some experienced with CrowdStrike. But assume that you cannot clear any ACH transaction, no credit card transaction, because the banking systems are taken offline. And how long would it take you to run out of cash? As
about 7 minutes, because I think I had like $50 in cash.
Exactly. And you think about like a storm, since you're from Minnesota, think about what happens to the stores before a storm hits, right?
Yeah.
All of a sudden, all the products are off the shelves. Now, we put this in the context of cybersecurity because it is very difficult for people who just want to run accounting practices, small business owners that just want to do what they do, to protect all these from all these cyber events. So all you can really do, I think, today is practice safe computing, multiple layers of computing, being thoughtful and teaching your people to be thoughtful about things that look suspicious because, frankly, the attacks are going to get so good, we're going to be hard-pressed to determine that they're actually real or not.
Right.
And I had 3 attempts on me this morning that I had to kind of give one of these head twists and say, that looks fake. And, just walk away from it because I do have a lot of practitioners that reach out to me directly and ask for help. And, I answer all those. But if one looks fake, I'm probably going to be a little mum.
Well, yeah. And, none of us are safe. KnowBe4 just a few days ago announced that they had basically, they had hired a North Korean hacker
Mm-hmm.
And really, that they had an AI manipulated image for their resume, and the person didn't gain access, and they know before, to their credit, disclosed this themselves. Right, there's a blog post from their CEO on it. But even those of us who are experts at not being socially engineered are, it's getting good enough that there's still risk there.
Well, and last year, Associate Brian Tankersley and I created a fake AI video.
Mm-hmm.
We became the Blues Brothers. So, each of us assumed a role. And it took us less than 30 minutes to create that.
Hmm.
And, in effect, if you think about how easily good people can create it, bad people can probably create it faster and better than we can do it. But, it is interesting because, one of the defense mechanisms we can do is very strong passwords. And we have recommended password managers for a long time. But, if you look at the 3 attacks that LastPass had, even though we very much liked LastPass Enterprise and Teams and recommended it frequently, we don't do that anymore. So, there's 20 or 30 products out there, all pretty good. But if you're not using a password manager, you are clearly putting your organization at risk. And therefore, we recommend products like Keeper or 1Password or Bitwarden just to have a repository that you can change and be alerted on a regular basis. Another layer of protection.
Right. That's great. So AI is going to do a great job making me more productive, but it's also going to represent some risk to me in terms of bad actors attempting to come after the key secrets or the key parts of my business and make things put me at risk.
Yeah, that's exactly right. In fact, the vendors behind this are asking for controls.
Right.
And even though we've named the companies earlier, most of those companies are asking for greater controls. But I don't think legislative action around the world will respond quick enough. The EU preliminary documents, which were approved in December of 23, they said that the cycle would be 2 years before they were approved. The new quantum hacking algorithms have been getting created for about 5 years. Because they've had 5 years of conventions on that, skipping 1 year, so 6. Mm-hmm. So, we're trying to respond, but these guidelines, they're actually called rails, or in Anthropic's terminology, the Constitution, the rules, they're trying to block bad actors from creating malware or creating nuclear bombs. But it's hard for the authors to outguess how the users of the systems are going to work their way around these things, making their prompts in little sections and then putting the sections together, for example.
Right. Yeah, that's interesting. So let's take a step further out for a second. So you've mentioned quantum computing a couple of times. Looking, past the 2-3 year horizon when AI will probably still be the conversation, to pass that to the next generation in tech. How do you think that things like quantum is going to impact the profession, if at all, outside of the sort of societal, right? You've outlined some societal impacts, right? But the risk of whole banking systems being taken down, the loss of public key encryption. What replaces those, right? And how do you see that evolving?
Yeah. So Jeff, this is really fun because I do recommend Michio Kaku's book on quantum supremacy. It's a very easy read for accountants. And the good news is that I had breakfast with Michio and his wife about a month ago. So, but I've quoted him for a long time on this. Now, part of the reason I'm continuing to work in technology related to accounting is I see the promise of AI. I see the promise of AI on quantum. And I'm trying to influence as much of this as I can, the rails we were just talking about, the operational rules. But here's the net. I cannot think of a single industry that won't be affected by quantum. So say it more positively. Every industry will have an effect by quantum. Okay, so as a professional, of course, the accounting profession will have the changes, but all of your clients downstream are going to be experiencing these changes too. So, what type of things will be affected? Food supplies, energy supplies, materials that are created, healthcare, the ability to use Internet of Things and monitor all sorts of attributes about healthcare that we just don't have enough computing capacity to monitor today. For example, there's 3,000 metabolites in urine, and if we have detectors in commodes, we can actually detect disease well in advance. And most of us know early detection of disease is much more treatable. So healthcare clearly is going to be on the line. 3D printing will get even more sophisticated, but staying in the quantum world, if you start throwing an industry at me, I'll say, well, here's some places you could use it. Bing, 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 bing. So again, the quantum supremacy is a nice guideline in terms of understanding what could be impacted. And you've got to assume that all of our accounting services will be impacted and all of our clients' businesses will have impact. Now, the only question is when. And, Dario Gil of IBM basically says we have all the technology we need right now. We don't have to do any more breakthroughs. And we will have products in play by 2033. And Harmit Nevin, I believe, of Google thinks they've got everything they need to, and they're thinking they might get there by 2029. And again, I can, continue. So people who are on the inside may be optimistic. So, hearkening back to your earlier comment, skepticism, right? The skepticism on this, will they get there on the time frame they say? Probably not. But will they get there? I think so. If we think about Amara's law, which basically says things move more slowly in the short term than we expect, but more rapidly in the long term than we expect. Amara's law definitely applies here. And, I'm so excited. I'm hoping that I can live to be, 100 or more to watch all this. I've always had a goal of being 102, so I'm hopeful to make it. But it turns out, I think quantum computing can actually affect the length of life, not from a healthcare perspective, but actually from a genetic modeling perspective. And the manipulation of telomeres for longer life. And by the way, that's been researched for a long time in Houston and Raleigh and other places, Chapel Hill, actually.
That's really great. That's interesting. It's interesting just to hear quantum computing talking. It's no longer science, it's now an engineering problem, right? You don't need a scientific breakthrough. You just need to figure out how to scale it. And that takes time, but we generally know how to do that.
We do. And in fact, the new IBM System 2, which is being built right now, System 1s are already deployed by Cleveland Clinic and ExxonMobil and some other bigs. But the System 2 is a pluggable computer that uses 3 of their Heron chips. So every unit has another 399 qubits, and you can plug those bloody things together. So IBM's got a roadmap that shows that they'll be well above 1,000 qubits in the early 2030 timeframe. I'm so excited about that because, frankly, if I have just 4 working qubits, I can outperform most of the large-scale computers available today. And with 16, there is no supercomputer today that has the same amount of compute power. Well, Microsoft's Quantinuum in the last quarter has shown that they can run 56 qubits. So they demonstrated that on June 5th. So again, I don't want to be too in the weeds with our listeners, but I want you to understand this is real. It is just a matter of time. It's not a matter of if. And by the way, we talk about that on security too. Right. It's not a matter of if you're going to get attacked. It's a matter of when.
Well, that's great. I like the idea of closing this out on the future. So Randy, thank you very much for joining us. It's been great. And tell the audience where they can find you if they want to reach out to you for any other reason.
Yeah, I think the easiest way is through our K2 website, k2e.com. And I do check email pretty frequently. So I'm Randy at k2e.com, just as easy as it sounds, or randyj at nmgi.com. So I do still old school process email. You'll find phone numbers and everything else. If I'm available, I actually pick up my phone too, which many people say, why don't you have your phone, filtered by administrative staff? And I say, I can filter things pretty quickly and I can answer questions. So that is the way you catch me, though.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Randy. And try to stay cool during the 100-degree temperature wave you're going to go through there in Chicago this week.
All right. All the best to you, Jeff. Thanks for the invitation to speak with you and your guests.
Thank you. I hope you enjoyed the podcast. You can visit our website, cpatransformation.com, or visit our channel on YouTube at tax1099.com for more episodes, clips, and discussions with industry leaders.